So the purpose of today is to give you a little bit of an explanation about blockchain technology, and how it can impact not just your business, but your client's business if you're in a service industry. And there's no one better in Northeast Ohio to give you that introduction to blockchain than my partner, David Croft. So let's just get started with the presentation. Welcome, everybody.
Thanks, Seth. Good morning, everyone. As Seth mentioned, I work in the tech field. I am a member of the corporate and transactional group at Meyers but I tend to practice mostly in the intellectual property area. I do some mergers and acquisitions, and I'm also, as Seth may have mentioned, the chair of the blockchain and cryptocurrency practice group at Meyers I'm also, fun fact, chair of the medical marijuana practice group at Meyers So I get to work with fake money and weed. In this presentation, we'll discuss this relatively new technology and why you should care about it in the context of your business. I'll discuss some key concepts like what is blockchain. We'll talk about its history. We can't talk about blockchain without talking about cryptocurrency. We'll talk about this concept called mining. And we'll talk about smart contracts, what they are and what they're not. I'll also delve into some uses as well as industries that are either looking into, currently developing, or have implemented and are using blockchain technology, like securities and ICOs. You may have heard of those before. IoT, or the Internet of Things. Data privacy, cybersecurity, banking, and supply chain and logistics. And finally, I hope to leave some time for your questions. So, what is blockchain? Before we delve into its history, I think it's important to start off with a baseline understanding of this technology. So I was introduced to blockchain technology in 2012. I was immediately immersed in the technology. In 2013, I attended my very first cryptocurrency conference, the Future of Money conference in San Francisco. It was there that I first heard Andreas Antonopoulos speak. For those of you who have not yet seen any of his presentations, I've included the site address to one of his videos, and I would encourage you to take a look. In this video, he educates the Senate of Canada about Bitcoin. This was in October of 2014. I think he provides a very good introduction into this technology from the cryptocurrency angle, and I would encourage you to take some time and watch what he has to say. But for this presentation, let's begin with a definition. And I'll start with Don and Alex Tapscott's definition. Don and Alex are the authors of the book Blockchain Revolution, which is also a good read. They say that the blockchain is an incorruptible digital ledger of economic transactions that can be programmed to record not just financial transactions, but virtually everything of value. Everything of value. Blockchains are, and I've highlighted some of the key terms here that we're going to talk about in a little bit. Blockchains are decentralized databases maintained by a distributed network of computers that rely on network effects and economic incentives to secure the network. What does that mean? Well, let's start off with a decentralized database. So take a look at this slide. You see a centralized database on the far left. We all use centralized databases, whether you know it or not. A centralized database works with a single database file and is controlled by one central entity or person in a single location. So think about your work network. A distributed database, which is on the far right, uses multiple database files spread across multiple locations, but can also be controlled by a single entity or person. Now, the decentralized database is a subset of the distributed database in that it uses multiple databases in multiple locations and is not controlled by any single entity or person. You see, blockchain technology takes advantage of these two important characteristics. No single location, no single point of control. And hopefully this is going to come together further on in this presentation. I know some of these are a little nebulous concepts if you're not used to working in the tech field. So the core components of a blockchain platform are peer-to-peer networks. That is, the miners or the nodes that we'll discuss later in this presentation validate and process transactions on a blockchain platform. This is done via the internet, and the transactions are validated using cryptographic encryption. Now on to the meat and potatoes of blockchain mechanics. The blockchain platform is a digital spreadsheet of transactions shared across a network of computers. Each computer runs a full version of the blockchain software. Those computers are called nodes or miners. New transactions are broadcast to the network and verified by each node. Verified transactions are grouped in regular intervals by network consensus. So that means the nodes have to agree that a transaction is valid before it's verified. This is done using various methods like proof of work, and a group of verified transactions is called a block. New blocks are added to the old blocks in the chain, hence blockchain. And the nodes or miners compete to solve that mathematical equation, which is done by cryptographic encryption. In other words, very complicated algorithms that only a computer could solve. The winner, or the miner that validates the transactions, gets the block reward. In the case of Bitcoin, that would be newly minted Bitcoins. And the new block is added to the chain. Remember I mentioned the term economic incentives? Well, that would be the economic incentive for a miner to process these transactions. Blocks are interrelated because each block contains part of the previous block's data. This is where the term immutable or unchangeable comes in. You would have to change all related blocks in order to modify any particular block in a chain. So let's talk about the history of blockchain. How many of you that are old enough remember life before or around the time of the inception of the internet? If you recall, the internet took the world by storm, opening up individuals and businesses to each other in ways no one could have imagined. Through very complex concepts that are taken for granted today, we all became connected to each other. Suddenly, I could send electronic mail to someone in China instantly. You could look up information about a company in New Zealand. You could do all of your shopping without leaving the comfort of your own home. Remember those books called encyclopedias? When's the last time you saw one of those? Things we all take for granted now. But can you remember how hard it was to comprehend this new technology? I want to show you this clip from 1994. This is the Today Show with Bryant Gumbel and Katie Couric. And they're talking about this concept called the internet.
Back now at 56 past, I wasn't prepared to translate that as I was doing that little tease.
Oh, that's
that little
right.
mark with the A and then the ring around it.
At?
See, that's what I said. Katie said she thought it was about.
Yeah. Oh.
But I'd never heard
Or
it.
around
I'd never
or
heard it
about.
said. I'd always
That's
seen the
right.
mark, but never heard
Yeah.
it said. And then it sounded stupid when I said it. Violence at NBC.
Yeah,
I heard
be
something
around
big
or
fight
about.
up in the lunchroom the other
See,
week.
there it is. Violence at NBC. GE.com. I mean,
Well, Allison should know.
what
do you
is
say to that,
internet
Allison?
anyway?
Internet is that
Massive computer
right,
network.
the one that's becoming really big now.
What do you mean? That's big. How does one? What do you write to it like mail?
No, a lot of people use it and communicate. I guess they can communicate with NBC writers and producers. Allison, can you explain what internet is?
No, she can't say anything in 10 seconds or less.
Oh, Allison will be in the studio shortly.
What is
What
it?
does it mean?
It's a giant computer network made up of started from.
Oh, I thought you were going to tell us what this was.
It's like
You've
a
been looking in the
computer
dictionary.
billboard.
It's not in there. It's a computer billboard, but it's
Right.
nationwide, and it's several universities and everything all joined together. And
Right.
And others can access it.
Right.
And it's getting bigger and bigger all the time.
It
Just
came
great.
in really handy during the quake. A lot of people, that's how they were communicating out to tell family and loved ones they were okay because all the phone lines were down.
I was telling Katie, and I've
But
been
you don't
talking.
need that. You don't need a phone line to operate internet.
No.
No.
Do you remember what that was like? Can you imagine if you knew then what you know now? That's basically where we are now, kind of, with blockchain. This is a revolutionary technology, and we're at that point right now. So a lot of folks think that blockchain is a new concept. Actually, it was created in 1991. The first actual work on a cryptographically secured chain of blocks was in 1991, and it was all about time-stamping documents. So Stuart Haber and W. Scott Stornetta created this new technology. They wanted to implement a system where documents' timestamps could not be tampered with or backdated. Someone was messing with their timestamps, and they wanted to protect that and make it so no one else could change it. This was not the first major innovation or the first major blockchain breakthrough. The first major blockchain breakthrough, and by the way, I like to think of blockchain technology in terms of major innovation. So the first major innovation, which was the first major breakthrough in blockchain technology, was Bitcoin. So you can't talk about the history of blockchain without discussing Bitcoin. Regardless of where you fall on the cryptocurrency spectrum, like it, hate it, don't want to hear about it, you can't talk about it. Many folks want to focus on one or the other, but blockchain is to Bitcoin as internet is to email. Think about that for a second. So Bitcoin was conceptualized by Satoshi Nakamoto in 2008 when the Bitcoin white paper was released. By the way, Satoshi Nakamoto is an unknown person or group of individuals that created Bitcoin. We still don't know who Satoshi Nakamoto is. But it was implemented in 2009, blockchain was implemented in 2009 as a core component of Bitcoin, and it serves as the public ledger for all transactions on the network. So I can look at the public ledger for blockchain and go all the way back down to the very first block, the very first Bitcoin that was created. It's called the Genesis block. In any blockchain platform, the first block is called the Genesis block. I can go all the way back and find that first transaction and track it all the way to today, right now, and watch transactions real time as they're happening. Anyone can. The second major innovation is the use of blockchain technology outside of Bitcoin. By the way, excuse my cold. I actually caught that from Bernie Moreno. So using blockchain technology outside of Bitcoin to facilitate things like secured transactions, Internet of Things, food and product tracking. Walmart's doing this for lettuce. Supply chain and logistics, we're going to talk about that. Insurance, real estate, and title, escrow, privacy, cybersecurity, and government policy. The third major innovation is the smart contract. So this is embodied in the second generation blockchain system called Ethereum. You've probably heard of Ethereum or Ether. That's what most smart contracts sit on, is the Ethereum blockchain platform. And I'll touch on that concept briefly later in this presentation. Finally, future innovations on the horizon include blockchain scaling. So everyone thinks of blockchain as this new, exciting, super fast technology. Actually, with respect to any particular blockchain, every computer or node in that blockchain network processes every transaction. That's slow. A scaled blockchain actually accelerates the process without sacrificing security by figuring out how many computers are actually necessary to validate each transaction and dividing up the work efficiently. So to manage this without compromising the legendary security and robustness of blockchain is a difficult problem, but it's not impossible. I've seen things in this industry, major advances by leaps and bounds very quickly. So I'm sure that this is something that's going to happen soon. A scaled blockchain is expected to be fast enough to power the Internet of Things and go head-to-head with major payment middlemen like Visa. We'll see. Here's some statistics that should pique your interest. You see some big numbers being thrown up there. I'm sure you've all heard of the statistic that 60% of 100% of the statistics are correct, or something along those lines. But I think it might be best if I go into an example that I've used before. In keeping with current events, I'm going to apply it to sports gambling. So Bonnie is a diehard Cleveland Browns fan, and she's got something to cheer about this year, doesn't she? Susie is a Cincinnati Bengals fan, and Bonnie and Susie are friends. But they always argue about which of their teams will do better each season, so they enter into a friendly wager, $500 to the winner. The wager is placed today, so there's quite some time before the results will be known. Nevertheless, each of them writes down the bet in their little notebooks. We'll call those notebooks ledgers. Susie, being a typical Bengals fan, inadvertently leaves off a zero, making the bet $50 instead of $500. An honest mistake. In any event, the Browns have a successful season, much more successful than the Bengals, and so Bonnie calls up Susie for her $500. Susie tells Bonnie it's only $50, and so they meet up, and each shows the other their little notebooks. Bonnie's showing $500, and Susie's showing $50. So what can Susie and Bonnie do? Well, one of them can concede, but will ultimately feel cheated. They could meet in the middle, or they could hire one of the attorneys at Meyers and sue the other person. Folks, I've just described everyday business issues. Invoice discrepancies, procedural failures, fines, performance issues, and who usually wins in these situations? Well, we know what's the golden rule? He who has the most gold wins. How can blockchain help? So let's say in the same example, this wager was recorded on a blockchain. Each party would have an identical copy, and the amount would have been agreed to by both parties. Further, neither party could modify the wager because it would require an accord or an agreement, and all changes would be ledgered, showing a perfect history of everything that happened. We have a perfect record. This is a very, very simple use of blockchain, but I'm using it to illustrate the point here. And let's take it a step further and create a smart contract. So a smart contract is actually, I'm going to talk about this a little bit, it's not actually a contract, it's a code-based program built to execute upon some kind of triggering event or a condition. In this case, it's the end of the season, at the end of the season, it's the best team's record. So let's say that the smart contract is coded to read each team's records from somewhere, like an RSS feed. As soon as the season's over, the feed sends an alert and our smart contract gets triggered. It knows that the Browns have the best record and Susie owes Bonnie $500. The smart contract can also be linked to a monetary instrument, like a virtual wallet or an escrow account, which can automate the payment process. Now this brings us to digital currency, or more specifically, cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency is a digital currency that's fungible into another currency. So think Bitcoin to US dollars, for example. You might be asking, what is digital currency that is not cryptocurrency? Think World of Warcraft or video game gold or tokens. But getting back to cryptocurrency, Bitcoin is one example of thousands, I say thousands of other blockchain-based cryptocurrencies like Ether, Ripple, Monero, I can go on and on and on. Crypto has several very appealing aspects. So it's usually, there's an exception here that I'm going to talk about in a minute called stablecoin, but it's usually not tied to a specific government. It's geographically agnostic, so the distributed aspect of blockchain enables global organizations to be more efficient. And believe it or not, contrary to popular belief, it's transparent. Traditional currencies are not easily tracked when they're exchanged. However, digital currencies are unique and traceable throughout the ledger. So you may be saying that Bitcoin and cryptocurrency is used by criminals and thieves. It's actually the worst thing that a criminal or a thief could use. If you're going to use some type of currency for criminal actions, use the US dollar. It's much less traceable than a Bitcoin, believe me. That's how they brought down Silk Road and were able to put things together and track every single transaction that happened on that website, to name a few. And we'll talk about mining. So since the blocks in a blockchain, remember the blocks are the groups of transactions, are heavily encrypted, they're like complicated math puzzles, algorithms that only powerful computer hardware can solve. Enter the miner and his rigs. We're not talking about someone hefting a pick and a shovel. Rather, think of data processing think of a data processing system using powerful computers. Now, this is a huge oversimplification, but the process of solving the math puzzles on these blocks and adding them to the public blockchain is roughly what mining is. Miners verify the transactions, ensure they're not false, and keep the infrastructure humming along, and the reward for doing so is payment in that block's coins. Remember the economic incentive I was talking about. Each miner competes for those rewards. The three major components to mining, and what every miner is focused on, are electricity. Some of you may have heard that the Bitcoin network by itself uses more electricity right now than the country of Ireland. That's probably, it's probably more than that now. And it goes up and down depending on the price of a Bitcoin. Bitcoin goes up, more miners jump on, more electricity is used, Bitcoin goes down, a lot of miners shut down for a while until it goes back up again. We talk about computing power as another component, and then luck, believe it or not. There's an actual formula that people have come up for luck. That's also a picture of a relatively small mine by today's standards. Used to be really big, but now it's small. Finally, let's talk about smart contracts, and I'll explain why I put quotes around each of those words. One of my partners came running into my office a couple years ago with an article on smart contracts, and he was really, really worried about lawyers being replaced by these smart contracts. And actually, I calmed him down, told him he couldn't be more wrong. I'm more worried about AI machines taking our place, but that's another presentation for another time. But so a smart contract's not a contract in a traditional sense, nor does it replace the same. A smart contract is a software program that sits on top of a blockchain platform and takes actions. So, it posts transactions, sends money based on certain data conditions that are detected in the blockchain. So smart contracts can potentially serve many uses, but they haven't replaced everything that's necessary in a traditional contract. So smart contracts are kind of like the business terms, right? I'll pay you $30 if X happens. But you've got so many other concepts like indemnification, for example, who can assign a contract, venue, a lot of other things that smart contracts just can't replace. So when you're working with a smart contract, again, it's a computer program. You still need the paper or electronic contract to work alongside of it. Let's talk about a manufacturing example. So for those of you that are manufacturers or work with manufacturers, manufacturers are used to getting paid on net terms, right? They take a risk on whether the customer can actually pay, and they act as the bank providing an interest-free loan to the customer during that net period. But what if I told you that a smart contract could solve those two issues? So if you put a smart contract in place, it would say that upon delivery of the product, and insert any other creative condition you want into this scenario, an inspection period, whatever you want, that upon satisfaction of those conditions, payments made to the manufacturer. And the contract could be linked to like the manufacturer or the customer's ERP system. The customer then would deposit, so the contract's developed, the customer deposits cryptocurrency onto the smart contract, and once the conditions are met, then the cryptocurrency the smart contract automatically transfers the cryptocurrency to the manufacturer's wallet. Why on earth would a customer ever agree to this? What happens if they put Bitcoin onto the smart contract at $5,000, and then by the time the contract's over, it's worth $10,000, or vice versa? $5,000, it's worth $5. You're exactly right. I would never encourage a client to do that. We would use the concept I mentioned called stable coins. Stable coins are cryptocurrency backed by something stable, like the US dollar or gold bullion, something that's relatively stable, the price is going to be the same when you deposit it and when it's transferred. So why wouldn't you use regular cash? Well, you can't use cash on a smart contract. It has to be electronic. So no more net payment terms. But what are the other problems with this? Well, I think the biggest problem, at least with the manufacturers I've spoken to, is getting everyone upstream and downstream, and the manufacturer, frankly, comfortable with this system. But again, I'm going to go back to the Today Show example. think about how comfortable you were, or your clients were, or the people that came before you were using email to send correspondence or banking online. No one did that. I mean, one of the early firms I worked on, my mentor would have his secretary come down and he would dictate his emails to her because he was uncomfortable typing them onto his screen, as he called it, or his computer. So it's all about getting comfortable with it, and I promise you, something, maybe not exactly this, but something along these lines are coming, just like the internet. So let's talk about raising capital. What's an ICO? Well, NASDAQ says that initial coin offering is a fundraising mechanism in which new projects sell their underlying crypto tokens in exchange for Bitcoin and Ether, or cash. It's similar to an IPO in which investors purchase shares of a company. According to CoinDesk's ICO tracker, billions of dollars have been raised since 2016 via ICOs. A lot of attention has been paid to regulatory issues in connection with ICOs, including the treatment of them as securities subject to regulation by the SEC, treatment as commodities subject to regulation by the Commodity and Futures Trading Commission, and treatment of the issuers of the ICOs as money service businesses subject to regulation by the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Also, we've got the issue of how do we treat this from a tax perspective. The IRS hasn't really issued any concrete guidance, so practitioners and taxpayers have to rely on precedent and work through that. Now, a token can be treated as debt or equity, as prepayment for goods and services, as convertible virtual currency, or as some other type of property. Many, like the SEC, view ICOs as unregulated securities that allow founders to raise an unjustified amount of capital, and there's quite a bit of truth to that, actually. Folks issuing ICOs early on would run amok and either steal the money or they were working with unregistered securities, and the SEC came in pretty hard. Others see this as innovation in the traditional venture funding model. So one of the things that the SEC has been trying to hammer into folks' head is that, or at least work around, is getting the smaller mom and pops to the public offering table. That you might have seen. One of their efforts was via the crowdfunding model, which is kind of an amalgamation of the ICO, or the ICO became an amalgamation of that. But again, the most important criteria to consider when you're dealing with an ICO or you're issuing an ICO is whether or not the token passes the Howey test. If it does, it'll be treated as a security. So what's the Howey test? Well, the Supreme Court, in issuing its decision, developed a test for determining whether certain transactions are investment contracts and subject to securities registration requirements. Under Howey, a transaction is an investment contract. If it's an investment of money, there's an expectation of profits from the investment. The investment is in a common enterprise, and any profits comes from the efforts of a promoter or third party. Those of you that are in investment are probably familiar with this particular case. It's a 1946 Supreme Court case that focused on orange groves. So do you think this is applicable with ICOs, or do we actually need our own set of rules? Yes, ICOs are versatile, less expensive than an IPO, and in some cases allow the owner to retain his or her equity, but they're very risky. There has been, as I mentioned before, a crackdown by the SEC, by FinCEN, by the CFTC on ICOs. They've all but shut them down unless you're willing to go through the rigorous filing with the SEC or the appropriate agency. I think what you're going to see is a resurgence of the ICO along these lines in the form of security or equity-backed tokens. Why? They're easier to track. And it's the new shiny toy on the market. You may have heard that Ohio jumped into the world of blockchain, along with many other states. Recently, the Senate bill that was introduced by Senator Matt Dolan, which amends the Uniform Electronics Transactions Act was codified, and it includes blockchain records and smart contracts as electronic records. It also allows for smart contracts to be legally enforceable as any other contract may be. Within Northeast Ohio, I'm sure you've all heard of the Blockland movement. I'm on several committees at Blockland, and I see some of my fellow Blocklanders here. And if you're interested in this technology or anything along the lines of Blockland, if you have any interest in this industry at all, I would be more than happy to help you connect with Blockland and get more involved to the extent that you can or want to. So just stop up and see me after the presentation, and I'll be happy to point you in the right direction. So let's talk about the industries and uses quickly, and I want to save some time for questions afterward. IoT, what is IoT? So it's the concept of connecting any device to the internet and to other devices. It's a giant network of connected things that collect and share data. So think about your smart microwaves, your self-driving cars, your Fitbit watches, your whatever. How does it work? So devices are connected to an IoT platform, which integrates data and applies analytics to share information. This increases efficiencies, automates certain tasks, especially when they're repetitive, mundane, time-consuming, or even dangerous. So IoT is what allows your crock pot to text you at work and let you know that your dinner's ready. Or, in the manufacturing concept, it's what allows a press machine to tell the operator it's running at a lower efficiency level and needs a tune-up or a new part. So according to Altabel, as many as 75 billion connected devices are predicted by 2025. It's a lot. It's a lot of data flowing back and forth, too. However, cost, efficiency, and security, remember we're talking about data here, are all major concerns. So what can blockchain do to help? It's a ledger, remember? We're talking about data collection here. So remember the key terms, immutable, decentralized. These concepts are great for data collection and security. IDC says that 20% of all IoT deployments will have blockchain services enabled by the end of this year. Remember, IoT is going to be, or is, and is continuing and is increasing in how much it's being used in everyday business. So the advantages are clear. Blockchain can build trust, it's transparent, everyone can view the information. Reduces costs and accelerates transactions, can automate data processing without the expensive centralized IT infrastructure. It protects against data tampering and disruption. And according to IBM, Mr. Cuomo, the three major benefits are building trust, cost reduction, and the acceleration of transactions. So let's turn to data privacy and cybersecurity in the context of blockchain. My colleagues in my previous presentation at Baldwin Wallace said this, I'm going to reiterate it. Data is today's gold. It's the most valuable thing right now, and it's going to continue to increase in value. Everything that you do is tracked. Data is recorded. Right now, data is being recorded on your cell phones, where you are, what you're doing, Alexa, Google Home, whatever you've got, data is constantly being recorded, and then it's sold. And companies use that data to create their products. Blockchain platforms are encrypted in distributed ledgers. So look at central databases like Facebook or Verizon or Equifax, or at least that's what they used to be. More than 140 million people were affected in the Equifax breach, and more than 50 million at Home Depot, and more than 3 billion, with a B, consumer accounts at Yahoo were hacked. How can blockchain help? So my kids love animals. I had to throw an animal example in here somehow. We're going to talk about squirrels versus chipmunks, right? So a chipmunk stores its acorns in one location. It's dead. But did you know that a squirrel can bury acorns all over almost a 1 acre area before the winter and remember exactly where those acorns are buried after the thaw? Every single one of them will remember. I don't know why, but it just does. It's kind of like a blockchain platform, right? It's decentralized. There's no central holding system. The data is distributed. There's no single point of failure. So if you want to steal a chipmunk's acorns, all you need is one point of access into that chipmunk's den, and you've got it all right there. If you want to steal a chipmunk's acorns, you only need one point of, if you want to steal squirrels, you need many points of access. Think about this in the context of storing data. Facebook, Equifax, stored most of their stuff in 1 or 2 or 3 server areas. If you had one point of access, you had all that information at your fingertips. Break that up into a distributed network, a decentralized or a distributed network where the data is in pieces everywhere. It's almost financially, I shouldn't say financially impossible, but not financially worth it to go after all that data, because you'd have to break into so many different areas and put all that stuff together. Also, we're eliminating the human factor from authentication. Let's face it, people are always the weak point when it comes to just about any type of security. With blockchain technology, businesses can authenticate devices and users without the need for a password. By the way, we just had a presentation in our office. Do you know what the most commonly used password is? Password, yeah. All lowercase. It eliminates human intervention. It's also traceable. Every transaction is time-stamped and signed digitally. Even if someone comes in and tries to break in, you're going to be able to see that at every point. Companies can trace back to every transaction and locate the corresponding party on the blockchain. So not just hacking, but also errors. You could trace that back to the errors, find out where the problems are. And this dovetails nicely into banking. In 2008, we all experienced the great financial crisis, which then led to the Great Recession. By the way, that was 2008. When was the Bitcoin white paper introduced? The same year. It's not a coincidence. So regulations, after the banking crisis, regulations emerged that restrict who can conduct business with financial institutions. Those are called KYC, or Know Your Customer, and Anti-Money Laundering, or AML, regulations. And those were integrated to a significant degree. So nowadays, before a new client can conduct business with a bank, it has to undergo KYC and AML checks. Actually, certain businesses are now requiring their suppliers, vendors, distributors to incorporate vigorous KYC and AML policies and procedures. We want to know who we're doing business with. We want to know where the money's coming from and going to. Mainly because if it's going to a place that is, we'll just call it bad, if it's going to a bad place, the federal government or any other agency's reach can extend into your pockets. So most businesses are incorporating these procedures. KYC is due diligence, where a bank obtains and verifies information about a client's identity, location, and line of business to ensure they're legitimate. And AML is the set of rules that addresses money laundering. So I'm not a banker, but I work with lots of banks. I actually have worked with the Department of Commerce Division of Financial Institutions on some of their tech issues, some of the fintech that they work with. This is a huge point of contention for banks, because the companies that they deal with that help them with these areas are very expensive, can be very slow, and they have a very limited number of entities that they can deal with in this regard. So they're hungry for new technology that can make things faster and easier and less expensive, frankly. So where does blockchain come in? With blockchain, a bank can share data with permissioned third parties like the federal government in real time. Currently, KYC and AML is really, really slow and time-consuming. It can reduce detection and reporting time. So if you're dealing with a bad actor, you're going to know it before you've processed 15 transactions and you're in deep water. Client data can be easily shared with other business units in the bank, as well as other banks and organizations, and it reduces the risk of duplication or error. According to Goldman Sachs report, banks can achieve significant operational cost and penalty reduction. These benefits can easily translate to businesses as well. How about combating fraud? Bank ledgers can be protected against fraud by using real-time execution, open and publicly available information, as well as providing a historical record of certain information which could make third-party hacks immediately obvious. Finally, let's talk about financial transactions. Blockchain can eliminate fraud on banking and trading platforms, reduce operational and administrative costs, that's a common theme here, can provide authenticity throughout the supply chain, which we're going to talk about in a second, track funds in real time, and create transparency. And the last industry that I want to talk about is supply chain and logistics. There are many other industries that blockchain can touch, but because of our limited time, I had to focus on just a few, and I thought that this might be relevant for some of you. So supply chains include many manufacturers that move many products through supplier networks. Most of the products that we own are made up of many different components manufactured by multiple different companies, compiled and put together by the ultimate brand, like Samsung, Apple, Dell. You all know that your Sony TV is really a Samsung or vice versa, right? They have basically the same guts made by the same companies. They just have a different label slapped on the front and a different price point. Blockchain can replace these intermediaries by synchronizing data and transactions among each participant in the supply chain. So a company could have instant tracking of inventory. Another thing that I never knew, my mom has been, she did hair for about 40 years before she retired. So I grew up in a hair salon, not literally, but figuratively. And so my mom was always around hair care products. My wife got into the business a little bit in the distribution, and I was shocked to find out how many hands touched that product before it actually hits the shelf. So if you've got an expensive Redken or Nioxin bottle of shampoo, it might have started out at $5, but it touches like 15 distributors before it actually hits the salon shelf or the shelf in Mark's, where it's actually not allowed to go, and they add a couple bucks each time. So think about being able to eliminate or track every time those steps, every time someone touched a product like that. So most of the things we buy aren't made by a single entity, but by a chain of suppliers who sell their components, like graphite for pencils, to a company that assembles and markets the final product. However, if a component fails, who gets hit? The brand, right? So if Gorilla Glass has a terrible flaw in its composition, Gorilla Glass isn't going to get hit with that. It's going to be Apple, because all the phones that are breaking, people are going to go into the Apple store and complain about it. They don't care about Gorilla Glass. But with blockchain, a company can provide records that show the product at each step. Provenance and SKU chain are just two examples of companies trying to solve this issue. And to increase their market share, many companies are joining the Blockchain in Transport Alliance. Though it was established only 2 years ago, this organization is the biggest commercial blockchain alliance today, and it has 500 members from 25 countries, which generate over $1 trillion, that's with a T, dollars worth of revenue each year. Blockchain can forecast how much product or materials in certain locations and actual demand over time to reduce inventory costs. It lends itself to easy integration into ERP software, and companies can see inventory of business partners and the actual prices based on consumption. Professional service firms like accounting firms have made significant investments into developing blockchain capabilities to make the processes as seamless as possible. So now we come to your business or your client's businesses. Where does blockchain fit? Where does this fit into your business? How can it help you? What do you need to do? You need to leave this presentation right now and have your own blockchain platform develop, right? No. You need to speak with your advisors as to how blockchain does or will affect your business and go from there. I'll leave you with one final thought before I take questions. I had a client of the firm call me. He was a machine operator, or he had a machine operating business or machining business. And in any event, he saw that I had been active in this industry a year or two ago and said, Dave, I need blockchain, don't I? What do I have to do? I have to, no. You don't. You're probably never going to need it. But most businesses will have to integrate somehow with it, whether it's the large companies you're supplying to or working for or your customers. There will be some form of integration. What form that is in the future, it's hard to tell, but it's good to get ahead of the wave and figure out where you are now and where you're going to be down the road. With that, I'll take any questions that you might have. Rick?
Could you comment on the blockland development here originally? What that means? I know you're involved.
So Blackland was a movement that was initiated early 2018, I believe, by Bernie Moreno. He got some of the city leaders involved, heads of companies involved, and what he saw was Silicon Valley has and will continue to have, to a larger extent, an exodus. It's just too expensive to live in Silicon Valley or around Silicon Valley. You've got folks making $600,000 that have to live out of their car. So most of these individuals are moving elsewhere, taking their businesses elsewhere, and Bernie's thought was, well, why not Cleveland? We were the epicenter once upon a time for industry. Why not become that again? And so he took a trip to Israel, which has a very large blockchain community, saw some of the things they were doing there, and said, we need a movement here. We need to figure out what we're going to do. So several nodes or committees were created within Blockland to address many different issues that would come up, one of which was place. So finding a physical location to invite and house startups and existing companies and professionals to advise and help those companies. One was, how can we work from a philanthropic aspect? One was the conference. One was the legal node. One was the political node, working with the folks at the state to get things like House Bill 220 or Senate Bill 220 passed. And where we are, so we had a very successful conference at the end of 2018, sold out, and I've been to a lot of conferences in this industry. Most of them are very salesy. They end up being like 3-day pitches for multiple companies. It gets a little, it's more like a trade show, we'll say. This conference was actually very educational, and we're going to have another one at the end of this year. And if you have any interest in this whatsoever, I highly advise registering early. I spoke at the last conference. I may speak at this one. And I believe that we'll probably have some idea soon where and what the place, the physical location for Blockland is going to be. And one final thing I want to say about Blockland, it's not just about blockchain. It's about all technology, AI, rendering, deep learning. Blockchain has kind of been the catalyst. It's very inclusive of all technology. Yes?
Let me go back to your sort of simple example of your brown rectangles a bit. Maybe myself at least can better understand this. So you and I have decided to make that brown rectangle back. We're going to then record that blockchain. So what happens? We create a new chain blocking that chain that's specifically just our bet.
Yes.
And we have a password that's how we know how to access it, or?
Technically, you wouldn't need a password because it depends on, this is a whole other discussion, because you can have permissioned blockchains and open blockchains. So like Bitcoin, the blockchain platform for Bitcoin is open. Anyone could see it. So if we had it on an open platform, we could see it. You don't have to have a password. You see the transaction, we can go back and say, all right, there's the bet. And again, bet may be the... What's that?
How do you know how to find it?
So for Bitcoin, again, I keep going back to that, but that's just it's the grandfather of all the blockchains. It would be wallet addresses. So if you know, and wallet addresses are a string of letters and numbers, right? So if you know what your wallet address is, You can search by that. You can search by a date and find all the transactions that happened on that date, and you could say, all right, on this date we made this, okay, here it is right here.
But you could also have security.
You can, that's a permissioned blockchain. That would actually be more relevant for something like storing medical records on a blockchain. Or if you have more of a centralized system, so like Wells Fargo, they may have their own blockchain platform to track all of the transactions through the bank, right? You have to be, they control that blockchain, and you can only get in if you've got a password and their permission to get in.
Do you foresee these platforms, Bitcoin and so on and so forth, to replace world currency?
No. So some of the first conferences that I attended in 2012 and 2013, I was the minority in those conferences because most of the conferences were filled with anarchists. They saw digital currency or cryptocurrency as replacing world banks and governments. It was a little short-sighted, but these were people that didn't have forms of identification, no social security number, lived completely off the grid. And they would have answered that question by saying, absolutely, it will replace all forms of currency and we'll have one world currency. Well, now we've got over 1,000 different types of cryptocurrency. The U.S. dollar backs some of it, with the stable coins. So I don't think that you're going to see that. What I think is you're going to see this industry changes quickly, and it creates advances in technology. For example, when we talk about the miners and the computers that process the transactions, when I started in 2012, the chips that were used were 32 nanometer chips on the boards that were put into the computers that were processing. Now they're like 7 nanometers. They've jumped it's made Intel and AMD up their game a lot because these companies are creating advances. It's similar to the cannabis industry. There's so much money that's pumped into the cannabis industry that you see genetics, agricultural advances that you never would have seen normally. But because you've got these nascent, brand new industries and a lot of money being pumped into them, you see all these advances. So when you ask a question like that and I say no, there's an exception or a caveat to that. But it may replace something, or it may change something. Just like using smart contracts. You don't know what you're going to see. It's something that you keep your eye on. It's like websites. Think about websites when they were first created, when the internet came out. They're a much different breed now than they were back then. There's just so many changes that have occurred. Internet shopping. There's just a lot of things that can happen that it's hard to foresee now. I mentioned security-backed tokens, companies trading their equities using digital currency. So that's...
Well, even now you see things like Zelle or Venmo or those type of things where, up until a couple of years ago, it was what the heck is this?
Well, the banks saw...
A check or you did a transfer, you did a wire, whatever.
J.P. Morgan saw Bitcoin, and they very quickly said Bitcoin's bad. Cryptocurrency is going away. It's awful. Meanwhile, they're in the back room developing their own cryptocurrency, which failed, by the way. But
So, given your two practice areas, is Bitcoin or digital currency, until federal banking laws are changed, is that going to be the way that transactions are done in the cannabis industry?
no, I don't think so. I mean, there are some cryptocurrency like Potcoin or Tokes that have been created specifically. Clever names that were created specifically to work within that industry. But to a large extent, most of the cannabis companies deal. They actually deal with banks if they can, for as long as they can. One of my clients on his 9th bank, until they have to deal with cash. There are also some other clever things that companies have done to continue to deal with banks, like work through the Federal Reserve and allow the Federal Reserve to actually launder their funds for them. But cannabis companies, I don't think that has caught on so much. Ohio was supposed to have a closed-loop payment system that never really went anywhere. There's an act right now in Congress that's kind of making its way around called the SAFE Act. So I guess it's two-pronged. One is maybe the SAFE Act will be passed in Congress and the banks will be able to work with cannabis companies, or they'll deschedule cannabis and banks will work with cannabis companies. But I don't think crypto, although it's a good idea, I don't think crypto companies or cannabis companies are as keen to work through that.
Going back to the smart contracts, trying to get a handle on it, it sounds like what you were describing is that the smart contracts are really more of an implementation tool for contracts than actual contracts.
Correct. It really is just a computer program that says, upon this condition happening, then this action will be taken. So upon your inventory dropping to X, we're automatically going to ship Y number of widgets to you. Yes?
So you think like a service like DocuSign, you think that's limited then?
What do you mean?
You think that will go away in the next 8-9 years?
I don't know. I mean, I mean, DocuSign has they've got a good business model. They're doing well. I think a company like DocuSign would be working towards storing signatures on a blockchain platform.
Can you talk about its use in contract administration, where a company has basically a foreign contract that many people sign? Is there utilization, application? Sure.
I mean, again, anytime that you are tracking, or you've got transactions, and I want you to not think of a transaction as financial. Transactions, anything where I guess something takes place, whether it's along the supply chain and logistics industry, or from a data storage industry, we're storing something on a ledger. So if you've got contracts, you can store those on a blockchain platform. Again, right now may not be practical, only because blockchain developers are in short demand. And just like when the internet was introduced to the greater public, people were charging gobs and gobs of money to develop websites, something you can do now by yourself for free. It's the same thing. People are charging gobs and gobs of money to develop blockchain platforms or to write smart contracts. I know some of the developers that write smart contracts, and it's just not gotten to the point where you're using a WordPress website template to develop your own website now. It's back in the days when people were actually writing the code and spending days and weeks to develop your website instead of minutes. But I think we're going to get there. There's already companies out there that are trying to make it easy for you to write your own smart contract on the Ethereum blockchain.
So let's say a company has, they want to guarantee the integrity of their data, and they don't have the means to actually, do their own blockchain or something. What are their options? Do they have to just sit around and wait for a product to come out? The first ones are really expensive, and they say, well, we're just going to have to sit and wait until something's within our budget. Well, what are their options to start utilizing the technology?
Well, there probably are companies out there right now. I just haven't done an exhaustive search. Most of my work nowadays has been in the regulatory area. I work with decentralized token exchanges right now, and I do a lot with miners. that's a whole nother ball of wax, the decentralized token exchanges. But there are probably companies out there right now that have developed products that may not be perfect, but are potentially usable by companies that I think that you've got some other solutions as well as far as data integrity goes. You may not need a blockchain right now. Again, one of the things that I want you to take away from this presentation is while you may not all need blockchain and your customers may not need blockchain, you should become familiar with it, understand it, and be ready for it, maybe now, maybe down the road, when it comes. Like I think I mentioned, Walmart's got a blockchain platform system to track their lettuce. That's so they don't have to deal with the $250 million romaine lettuce recall because a segment of like $10,000 worth of lettuce was infected with E. coli, right? Blockchain can shrink that down. But again, it's just, if you're a farmer and you grow lettuce and you work with Walmart, you talk to your advisor and say, hey, they're doing this blockchain thing, what do I need to do? The advisor then looks into that and says, here's what you need to do.
Dave, can you address the economics of that distributed network and the monetization of it?
Address the economics of the distributed network.
Can you just elaborate on that? I mean, I understand there's people out there, they're mining, but like, how do they get paid?
Okay. So the economic incentive, right? It's very expensive to mine. Electricity costs a lot. Hardware costs a lot. I work with clients that work in 450 megawatt facilities in upstate New York. There's a place in Messina called Coinmint. Just to give you a little frame of reference, 450 megawatts, that's enough to run 450 Bay Villages. So it's a lot of electricity in one facility. Ton of miners, okay? Worldwide, all these miners are fighting with each other to verify transactions. Once you verify transactions, they're grouped. Once you create the block, the transactions are put in a block. If you're the miner that creates that block, the code, at least for Bitcoin, says we're going to issue, and I believe it's 6.5 Bitcoins now. I can't remember exactly where we're at. It halves every number of years, but once you create that block, you create newly minted Bitcoins. And of the newly minted Bitcoins, you keep half, and the other half goes out into the ether, into the system, right? So you're running these computers, and maybe you get 10 or 15 Bitcoin a day because you're solving blocks, 10 or 15 Bitcoin a day. Well, 10 or 15 Bitcoin a day in today's standards is $50,000 to $75,000 right now. I think they're trading right now at five grand a piece. The more miners you've got together, so they hook them into, they coagulate the miners together. So let's say all of us own 5 miners. We could create a pool and direct all of our energy and all of our mining power towards, single transactions. And then we share those rewards pro rata. But so that's kind of the economic incentives. As miners solve transactions and create blocks, they're awarded newly minted Bitcoins. And they will oftentimes, so that they have enough liquidity, those Bitcoins, they'll take them right to an exchange like Coinbase and sell them for US dollars, and then take the US dollars and pay their power, distribute to their owners, pay their rent, pay their insurance, pay their internet bills, buy new miners. Sometimes they can actually take the cryptocurrency and pay for things directly with that, which is what they would prefer to do because most miners support the industries that they're working in. Some miners will do what's called hodling. That's an acronym for hold on for dear life. And basically that's you hold on to your cryptocurrency in the hope that it's going to get back up to $20,000 or like the founder of McAfee was, I can't remember, is it McAfee? Is that the founder? He thinks it's going to be at $1 million before the end of 2020. He's also toting around guns, and it's crazy.
So the
Jack.
miner, that one picture that you showed of a miner installation, just looked like a Google site.
Very different from Google. So data rooms are very, very, very clean. You actually have to walk in there almost wearing surgical scrubs. Everything looks white except for the computers and the server racks. Everything's humming along. It's very, very cold in those rooms. Cryptocurrency miners don't need that kind of atmosphere. They can actually, as long as there's airflow, you could work in a dirty site, really. We've actually looked at sites, former sites that would probably be environmental hazards for most. You can sink miners, right? Actually, miners are, one of my clients is developing container miners, so they're taking shipping containers, filling them with miners, and you can drop them at sites that have enough power to run them. So if you've got a business with some extra space and some extra power, you can drop them there. And some of these miners can actually emit enough heat to heat whole buildings. Probably heard of that before, too. Any other questions?
It takes so much power, is there's just a lot of computers there?
Yeah. They use a lot of power.
That plant was seen.
Huh?
The big General Motors plant.
Yeah, well, they use, they look at paper mills. Paper mills also have a lot of power draw. Any more questions? I'll stick around afterwards if you folks have anything else you want to talk about. But thank you so much for coming out this morning. Appreciate your attention. Thank you.